Here I am, 10 years into a marriage I thought was rock solid, only to watch it crumble right before my eyes. It's almost laughable, really. You think you've got everything under control, only to realize you've been completely blind to what's been going on. Olivia and I used to be that couple everyone admired, always doing things together, traveling, running marathons, hiking, cooking, you name it. It felt perfect, or at least I convinced myself it was. But then life happened. I dove into my job, working long hours and taking on more responsibility, trying to provide. It wasn't like I was neglecting our marriage, but apparently I wasn't doing enough. Olivia started to change. She became short with me, irritated over the smallest things. I'd come home exhausted, but still eager to talk, only to find her glued to her phone or zoning out in front of some pointless TV show. When I tried to start a conversation, she'd roll her eyes and snap, "Do we really have to talk about this now?" Then the complaints started. At first, it was the usual, "We don't go out anymore," or "Why don't you plan anything anymore?" Maybe she had a point. But soon enough, the jabs started coming personal and sharp. "You've become so predictable, Daniel. You're boring." That one stung. Never in a million years did I think I'd be called boring by my own wife. But there it was, as real as a slap in the face. I tried. God, I really tried. I planned a romantic weekend getaway, thinking it might shake things up, help us reset, remind us of what we used to have. Her response? "I've got work. I can't just drop everything for a vacation." And the excuses didn't stop there. That's when the late nights started. "Work's been crazy, babe," she'd say. "I have to stay late." Then came the business trips. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always been more career-driven than I was. But things started to feel different. It was subtle at first, small changes. She'd come home from the gym looking flawless, like she hadn't even broken a sweat. She started dressing differently, buying new clothes, spending hours on her hair and makeup. But it wasn't for me, that much was clear. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure husband jumping to conclusions because his wife was working late. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. There were nights she wouldn't come home until after midnight, and when I asked where she'd been, she'd get defensive and offer vague excuses. "Don't you trust me? I'm working hard for us." Then came the night I'll never forget. I sat up waiting for her, phone in hand, staring at it like a fool. It was past midnight, and my gut was in knots. I texted her again and again. No reply. By 1 a.m., I was a mess, thinking maybe something had happened. A car accident. Anything. But then that gnawing feeling of suspicion crept in, too. When she finally walked in, she acted like nothing was wrong, shrugging off my concern with some half-baked excuse about a work emergency.
No apology.
No real explanation. The next morning, she left for work like nothing had happened, leaving her phone on the table. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. I shouldn't have gone through her phone. I should have respected her privacy. But honestly, I didn't care. Something was off and I needed answers. I'm not proud of it, but I picked up her phone. And there it was. A message from Luke. Luke, some guy from her office I'd heard of but didn't know. The message was clear. "Last night was fun. Let's do it again soon." And that damn winky face. My heart sank. It was like the floor dropped out from under me. My hands started shaking, and my first instinct was to throw the phone across the room. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, set it back where I found it, and walked away. I didn't confront her right then and there. I couldn't. I was furious, but I needed to cool off and figure out what to do next. My mind was spinning. The late nights, the business trips, the way she'd been dressing, like she was trying to impress someone else. Not me. It all clicked. And damn, I was furious. But more than that, I felt stupid. Stupid for not seeing it sooner, stupid for believing her lies. When she came home that night, I didn't say a word. I just watched her. Of course, she didn't notice. She was on her phone again, probably texting Luke, laughing at some dumb joke they shared. And there I was, sitting across from her, trying not to completely lose it. It's crazy how quickly everything can come crashing down. One minute, you think you've got everything locked down, and the next, your life feels like a complete joke. That's exactly where I was. Sitting in my own house, next to my wife, who was clearly seeing someone else, and yet I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. After finding that message from Luke, I couldn't just keep pretending everything was fine. My gut was screaming at me. This wasn't just some work thing. There was more to it, and I had to know the truth. You ever get that feeling? Like you know something's off, but you just can't put the pieces together? That was me. Every time she came home late or left for one of those business trips, it felt like she was sticking a knife in a little deeper each time. The first signs were small things I started noticing, like Olivia suddenly throwing herself back into the gym. She'd always been into fitness, but for a while, it seemed like she had lost interest. Now, though, she was spending hours there, coming home in tight outfits that made her look way too good for someone who just worked out. But it wasn't just the gym. She started buying new clothes, expensive stuff too. Dresses, lingerie, makeup she hadn't even touched in years. And here I was, sitting there, wondering who the hell she was dressing up for, because it sure wasn't me. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but the more I watched, the clearer it became. She was hiding something, and I had to know what it was. One night, I made the mistake of checking her phone again. I know, I shouldn't have, and I'm not proud of it, but at that point, I needed proof. But when I went to unlock it, I realized she'd changed the password. That's when it hit me, whatever she was hiding, it was bad. I wasn't imagining things. She was actively covering her tracks. That was the turning point for me. I knew I couldn't let her make a fool out of me. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I hired a private investigator. Yeah, it sounds dramatic, but when you're losing your mind, watching your wife slip away and not knowing why, you'd do anything to get answers. It wasn't cheap, but by that point, I didn't care. A few days later, I got what I was looking for, and man, did it hit hard. The investigator sent me pictures of my wife of 10 years, sitting in a restaurant with Luke, holding his hand like some lovesick teenagers. I scrolled down and then I saw them kiss, right there in public without a care in the world.
Nos cham. No hesitaschen.
Just two people who clearly didn't give a damn about anyone else. This wasn't some quick peck on the cheek. This was a full-on kiss. Passionate. The kind we hadn't shared in God knows how long. I stared at those pictures for what felt like forever. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, numb. It was real. She was with this guy, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. All those suspicions I had, the ones I'd been dreading, were right there, plain as day. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront her. I waited until she came home from one of her work trips. She walked in like nothing had changed, smiling, chatting, acting like we were still this happy couple. That's when my blood really started to boil. How could she be so calm, so innocent, like nothing was wrong? I waited until she sat down on the couch. Then I laid it all out. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just pulled out my phone, opened up the pictures, and handed it to her. Care to explain this? Her face didn't even change. She looked at the pictures, then back at me and just shrugged. I'm not interested in doing this anymore, Daniel, she said, just like that, cold as ice.
No guilt. No remorse.
Nothing. I'm tired of this boring life. You're not the same man I married. That's when the anger started to rise in me, but I forced myself to stay calm. So that's it? You cheat on me because you're bored? She didn't even flinch. I didn't cheat, Daniel. I'm done with this marriage. I've already filed for divorce. Divorce. It hit me like a freight train. She was already one step ahead of me. While I was sitting there trying to figure out how to save what we had, she was ready to throw it all away, like it never mattered. You filed for divorce? I whispered, my voice barely audible. I told you I'm done. I want to live fully. I can't do that with you anymore. You're stuck in this boring, monotonous existence, and I'm not wasting any more time trying to fix it. I sat there stunned. She was done. Just like that. 10 years of marriage. The life we built together. The memories, good and bad. All of it meant nothing to her. She was ready to walk away without even feeling bad about it. Something inside me just snapped. The pain, the betrayal. It hit me all at once, and I couldn't take it. I wasn't going to let her just walk away without facing the consequences. Not after everything we'd been through. I stared at her, my voice sharp as ice. Not after what you did. She didn't flinch. She crossed her arms and just stared back at me like she didn't care. I'm not asking for your permission, Daniel, she said, her tone flat. This is happening whether you like it or not. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body fighting to keep my temper in check. We'll see about that. She smirked, like she already knew she had the upper hand. You don't have a choice, she said, like it was already all decided. But the truth was, I did have a choice, and I was about to make her regret every damn second of this. I never thought I'd find myself this guy. The one sitting in his living room, stunned and broken, trying to figure out how the woman I'd loved for 10 years could just throw everything away like it meant nothing. When Olivia told me she was done with our marriage, something inside me just shattered. It was like a door slamming shut, and suddenly, there was no air left in the room. For a second, I felt like I was floating in an empty space, hollow. But under that shock, under the pain, something else started to grow. Rage. No, it wasn't just anger. It was pure, unfiltered rage. 10 years. 10 years of love, struggle, joy, and heartache. All of it just tossed aside. For what? Some guy at work, because I wasn't exciting enough for her? It didn't make any sense. All those memories we shared, our vacations, the late-night talks about our future, suddenly felt meaningless, like they were all just part of some cruel joke. She'd made up her mind. She was done, and she wasn't even pretending to care about it. I wasn't just a husband to her anymore. I was just another part of her life she'd grown bored with. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this. After our confrontation, I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to make sense of it all. How did I get here? What had I missed? Was there something I could have done differently to see this coming? But no matter how much I turned it over in my head, one thing was clear. Olivia had made a choice. She had chosen to betray me with Luke while I was out here, still believing we were building a future together. And now, she wanted to walk away and leave me to pick up the broken pieces.
Hell no.
I wasn't going to let that happen. Betrayal doesn't just hurt. Changes you. That deep, gnawing pain twists and warps until it becomes something else entirely. For me, it became this fiery, unrelenting rage. I couldn't let her walk away like nothing mattered. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after how easily she destroyed my life. Then something clicked. Ava, Olivia's mom. Ava and I had always gotten along better than Olivia and I ever did. Over the years, Ava had been the one to see through Olivia's mask. She'd mentioned a few times that she was concerned about Olivia's attitude toward Luke. She even suggested I keep an eye on her late nights. At the time, I thought she was just being paranoid. But now I realized she'd been right all along. The idea started to form in my mind, and I realized maybe Ava could help me make sense of all this chaos. I called her, asking if I could stop by. Her voice was filled with concern as she agreed. Ava had always seemed to care about me more than she did Olivia. When I showed up at her house, she greeted me like she always had, warmly, like nothing was wrong. Her home was cozy, almost nostalgic. We sat down and I spilled everything. The affair, the pictures, the confrontation, everything. Ava listened, shaking her head in disbelief, her face a mask of disgust. I knew it, Ava said, pouring me a glass of wine. I always knew something wasn't right with Luke. I just didn't want to believe Olivia could be that reckless. I took a sip, the bitterness of the wine matching the bitterness churning inside me. It's worse than reckless, Ava. She's thrown everything away. She's already filed for divorce. Ava squeezed my hand, her eyes full of sympathy. I'm so sorry, Daniel. You deserve so much more than this. And that's when something inside me shifted. I had noticed Ava before. She was attractive even after all these years. After her husband passed, she'd seemed so lonely, so vulnerable. And I was desperate enough to see an opportunity in that vulnerability. We spent hours talking, bottle after bottle of wine, our conversation getting deeper with every passing minute. I told her things I had never said aloud. How angry I was, how betrayed I felt, how utterly lost I had become. Ava listened intently, nodding, offering comfort. There was something about the way she listened, the way she made me feel understood, that made everything feel a little less unbearable. I didn't realize how badly I needed that moment until it was already happening. Ava opened up about her own struggles, her marriage, and the loneliness she'd felt after her husband died. She even admitted that sometimes she wished she'd done things differently. The more we talked, the closer she got. Her hand lingered on mine, her laugh softened, and the look in her eyes changed. It wasn't just sympathy anymore. It was something else. She was flirting with me, and honestly, in that moment I didn't care. All I could think about was making Olivia feel the way I did. Empty, abandoned, betrayed. An eye for an eye. Before I even realized what was happening, Ava was leaning in, her lips brushing against mine. I didn't stop her. In fact, I pulled her closer. The whole thing felt surreal, like I wasn't even in control of my own body. But I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about guilt or right or wrong. All that mattered was hurting Olivia back. I wanted her to feel the weight of what I was going through. The next morning, I woke up expecting to feel something. Guilt, regret, maybe even shame. But I didn't feel anything. I felt cold. The emptiness inside me was so overwhelming that I couldn't even process what I'd done. It wasn't about attraction. It wasn't about anything physical. It was about power. It was about making Olivia feel at least a fraction of the pain I was carrying. It was about taking back control. After everything she'd done, I needed to take control of something. I made sure that video was saved in every possible place. There was no way I was losing my leverage. That video was my tool, my weapon to make Olivia feel the agony I'd been through. When you're betrayed like that, your mind takes you to dark places. It stops being about what's right or wrong. It becomes about making them pay. The next day, I waited for Olivia to come home. The plan was already set in motion. When she walked in, I didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I wasn't interested in pretending anymore. "We need to talk," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. Too calm for what was about to happen. She raised an eyebrow, probably thinking this was just going to be another argument about the divorce or her affair. She had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and hit play on the video. The shock on her face was priceless. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was frozen, completely speechless. "Do you see this?" I said, my tone steady, my finger hovering over the play button. I made sure she saw every second of it. "This is your mother and me." Her face drained of color, and she snapped back to reality just long enough to snatch the phone from my hand. But it didn't matter. I had backups everywhere. She could smash the phone, but the video would still be out there. "You're sick," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "How could you do this? How could you?" I cut her off, my words sharp. "I'm not the one who started this, Olivia. You did. You threw our marriage away. You didn't care. You didn't care about me, about us, about what we built. So don't act like you're the victim here." Her fists clenched, her face twisting in disgust. "This is disgusting. You're disgusting. How could you?" "With my mother." I didn't flinch. "Let's be clear, Olivia. This isn't about your mother. This is about you. And the fact that I'm done playing nice." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "I've got that video on multiple devices. And if you don't sign over your share of the house, I'm going to make sure it goes viral." Her eyes narrowed with pure hatred, but I could see the fear underneath. She knew it. She knew I wasn't bluffing. "You wouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a question. It was a desperate attempt to convince herself that I wasn't capable of doing something this messed up. "I will," I replied, no hesitation in my voice. "And you know I will." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She was the same woman who had shattered me without a second thought, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. "Please, Daniel," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. You don't have to do this." I sat back, crossing my arms. "You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Luke. You should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't good enough for you anymore. Now this is your reality." I could feel my pulse quicken again, my anger flaring up once more. "You sign over the house and I keep the video to myself. Don't, and I'll make sure the whole world sees it. Your friends, your coworkers, your family, and yeah, your mother. Imagine how that plays out. Think about what they'll say." Olivia was crying freely now, but I couldn't find a single ounce of sympathy for her. For a split second, I almost felt something, pity maybe, but it vanished just as quickly as it came. She deserved every bit of this. "What's it going to be?" I asked, my voice cutting through her sobs. She didn't answer immediately. She paced around the room, rubbing her temples, muttering to herself. I could tell she was trying to find a way out of this, trying to figure out how to fix things. But there was no escape. She was trapped, and she knew it. After what felt like an eternity, she stopped. She looked at me, defeated, and said, "Fine, I'll sign. Just don't release the video." And just like that, she had capitulated. I nodded, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. Good choice. The next day, we met with the lawyers and Olivia signed the papers, relinquishing her claim to the house. I didn't feel bad, not even a little. Part of me felt victorious, like I had finally won something in this twisted game we were playing. She had betrayed me, and now I had made sure she paid for it. When it was all over, I watched her leave the lawyer's office. Her shoulders slumped, her steps slow and defeated. It was almost as though she was trying to hold it together, but I could see how hollow she looked, like a shadow of the woman I once knew. For a moment, I thought about what could have been, how different things could have turned out if she hadn't cheated, if we'd communicated better, if I hadn't let myself become someone I didn't recognize. But quickly, I pushed those thoughts away. What ifs were useless now. I had the house. I had my revenge. But did it make me feel better? Not really. In the end, it was an empty victory. Sure, I had gotten what I wanted. The house was mine, Olivia was gone. That's what I kept telling myself. But even though I'd hurt her where it mattered, I couldn't ignore the void inside. I had won the battle, but I hadn't won back my peace of mind. The house, though, the house. I couldn't stand it anymore. Every room, every corner screamed of her, of us. The life we'd built, now shattered beyond repair. The kitchen where we'd once cooked meals together now felt like a place of solitude. The living room, where we'd cuddled on the couch and laughed together, now felt like a tomb, full of ghosts I didn't want to see. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a prison. I had to get out. I couldn't live here, not like this. So I made a decision. I was going to sell it. I didn't need it. Hell, I didn't even want it anymore. The house had become a symbol of everything that had fallen apart. Trust, love, time. All of it gone in a heartbeat. Letting it go felt like the only way to truly cut ties with the past. But the process wasn't as simple as I had hoped. Putting the house on the market was one thing, but every time I walked through those doors, I was hit with a flood of memories. The weight of regret, the unanswered questions. What if I had been more present? What if she hadn't cheated? What if I hadn't let things get so bad? Those what-ifs were suffocating. They gnawed at me, relentless and unforgiving. I tried to drown them out with work, with alcohol, with anything that would fill the emptiness inside. But no matter what I did, they always found a way back in. One night, after I'd had more than enough to drink, I found myself sitting in the empty house alone, in the silence that felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. And that silence, it felt like a weight I couldn't carry anymore. I realized, in that moment, I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep punishing myself by holding on to everything that reminded me of her. This house wasn't just a building. It was a trap. Every room, every memory, was a chain that kept me locked in a past I couldn't escape. So I did what anyone would do when they're drowning. I reached out to old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. People I had pushed away when Olivia and I had retreated into our own world. They didn't ask questions. They didn't judge. They just listened, offered their support, and reminded me that life didn't end after a divorce. One night, after a few rounds of drinks and catching up, one of my friends turned to me and said, "You know what you need, man? You need to get out of here." First, I laughed it off. A trip? I could barely bring myself to leave the house, let alone go on vacation. But then, as the words settled in, I realized maybe he was right. What did I have to lose? The house was being sold. I had nothing holding me back anymore. Maybe leaving for a while was exactly what I needed. So I started looking into it, somewhere far enough away from my past that I wouldn't have to keep running into the same problems. Somewhere new, but still close enough to reality so I wouldn't lose myself completely. I considered places like Italy, France, Spain, even Scotland. Places I had always dreamed of visiting but had put off for one reason or another. Now I had the time. I had the means. I had nothing holding me back anymore. And for the first time in a long time, a sense of hope started to creep in. Maybe this was my chance. A chance to reset. A chance for something new, something better. The house would be gone soon, and with it, the last connection to the life I had with Olivia. I was ready to let it all go. It wasn't just about running away. It was about shedding the weight of everything I had been carrying. The anger, the hurt, the shame, the loneliness. I needed to break free from the memories. I needed to break free from the person I had become. And for the first time, I actually believed that I could. I booked the trip. I was leaving. It wasn't an escape, it was a beginning. And I was ready to start again. Maybe this time I'd find something real. Maybe this time I'd find myself. I needed to move on. I couldn't carry that weight anymore. After the house was sold, I felt a strange sense of lightness, as though a burden had finally been lifted. The place that had once been filled with hope, dreams, and promises was now just a hollow reminder of everything I had lost. The next day, I booked the flight. When I landed in Italy, it was like stepping into a different world, one I'd only dreamed of. The sights, the sounds, the vibrant energy of everything around me. It was all so far removed from the oppressive heaviness of home. I didn't have a solid plan, just a vague list of places I wanted to visit: Rome, Florence, Venice. I decided to start with the iconic spots and see where the journey would take me. For the first time in ages, I felt free. I wandered through the cobbled streets, marveled at the centuries-old art, and sat at cafes, watching the world drift by. I felt anonymous, like I wasn't Daniel, the guy who had been betrayed. I was just a traveler, blending into the flow of life. And it was liberating. As days turned into weeks, something began to change within me. Peace. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long. The anger, the hurt, the bitterness, they were still there, lurking in the back of my mind, but they no longer consumed me. The farther I got from Olivia and from the house, the lighter I felt. I started to remember who I was before everything went wrong. The man who didn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. The one who had once loved life, who welcomed new experiences, and who was open to seeing beauty in everything. That's when I met her. It happened in Florence, in one of those small, tucked-away art galleries that only the locals seemed to know about. I was lost in thought when I spotted her. Lily. She was in the corner, absorbed in her work, so completely in her own world that I felt like I was intruding just by looking at her. Her dark hair was pulled up messily, her hands were covered in paint, and there was an energy about her that drew me in. She moved with an effortless grace, as if she was dancing to a rhythm only she could hear. It was a freedom I hadn't seen in a long time, raw, uninhibited, free of the burdens that most people carry around. And it was such a sharp contrast to everything I had left behind. Where Olivia had been cold, calculating, and emotionally distant, Lily was warm, spontaneous, and alive. Without even thinking, I found myself walking toward her, and before I knew it, we were talking. She was an artist, of course. Born and raised in Florence, she lived above the gallery in a small apartment, where she spent her days painting, sculpting, and creating anything that inspired her. Lily had this incredible way of seeing the world, finding beauty in the smallest details, the things that most people overlooked. We spent hours talking, lost in conversation. By the end of the day, I knew I wanted to see her again. Over the next few weeks, Lily and I became inseparable. We spent our days exploring Florence, visiting galleries, sitting by the river, or simply talking about everything and nothing. Her perspective on life was refreshing. She wasn't cynical or jaded like I had become. She didn't care about my past or any of the baggage I carried. She was just there, fully present. And for the first time in a long while, I began to feel present too. Lily helped me rediscover parts of myself that I thought I had lost forever. The part of me that still believed in happiness, in love, in the idea that life could be beautiful despite all the pain. She taught me that it was okay to let go. Let go of the hurt, the grudges, the anger. She showed me that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning how to carry it without letting it define me. One evening, we sat on the rooftop of her apartment, watching the sunset. She was sketching in her notebook and I was just there, feeling the warmth of the breeze, the soft glow of the fading sunlight, and for the first time in ages, I felt at peace. I wasn't thinking about Olivia or the house or any of the mistakes I'd made. I was simply present in the moment with Lily, and then something shifted. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. The urge for revenge, for retribution had faded. It had been a fleeting moment, a temporary satisfaction that never truly healed me. But being with Lily, being far away from the life I'd known, that was what had started to heal me. I turned to Lily and said, I never thought I'd be able to let go of all of it. The anger, the bitterness. I thought that was just who I was. But with you, I don't feel that anymore. She smiled, her eyes full of warmth, and said, Life's too short to hold on to pain, Daniel. You've got to let it go, or it'll eat you alive. And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had spent so much of my life consumed by anger, letting Olivia's betrayal define me. But here I was, halfway across the world, with a woman who made me feel alive again. For the first time, I understood that my happiness didn't depend on getting revenge. It didn't depend on making Olivia feel the way I did. My happiness was mine to claim. It was about me, about my ability to leave the past behind, to let go of the hurt, and to free myself from the weight I had been carrying for so long. By the time my trip ended, I was a different person. The man who had left to escape his past wasn't the same man returning. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free from Olivia, free from the past, free from the version of myself I had come to resent. And I had Lily to thank for that. She had shown me that life wasn't over, that there was still so much left to experience. She didn't just help me rediscover life. She helped me rediscover myself. I wasn't just moving on. I was becoming the man I was meant to be all along.